Welcome back, Gale Force. I'm Gale, and with the news of Nintendo Switch Online announcing Fire Emblem Sacred Stones was going to show up on there, I thought, hey, what better time to make a tier list for the playable cast for the main campaign? So that's what we're going to do today. Uh, and to start things off, we will just get right into it. Erica is probably in C tier. She's either in like high C, low B. She is certainly better than some of the other lords in the series, uh, mostly due to the fact that she eventually gets a mount, but she does have really low stats to contend with from the start. She has good growths, but she also remains sword locked the entire way through, which is uh, it's unfortunate. It's not a good thing to be in as the main character, but by the time that it would really do anything. She's usually fine for the early game where it would matter the most. And then in the late game, she has an effective weapon that works against all of the monsters she'll be fighting anyway and gives her some stat boosts. So ultimately, Erica is probably right about top C tier. We have Seth, who is no question top of S tier. In any tier list about Fire Emblem, Seth will be top of S tier. He is the single strongest unit the series has ever seen. He will likely remain so for all of time. He absolutely destroys this game. He single-handedly makes this game the easiest in the series, even if you don't bother to use the Tower of Volney, which is, if you don't know, an in-game tower that you unlock about 6 or 7 chapters into the game that allows you to freely train up your units. Uh, Seth can solo the game. He can do whatever you want him to do, but he kind of makes the game too simple. So to first time players, I would recommend using the Tower of Volney as you need it. Don't get me wrong, but I would really recommend shying away from using Seth unless you're just a big fan of him, at least on your first playthrough, just to get some actual challenge out of the game. Next up, we have Franz. Franz is a really good unit. He doesn't have the greatest growths known to man, but he is in the best class in the game. He starts in Cavalier, which gets swords and lances. He can potentially become either a Great Knight or a Paladin, which is what Seth is. And while his bases and growths aren't super great, he has a lot of time to make up the ground. And unlike Erica, his bases aren't so low that it's like a concern whether he will get there or not. Uh, yeah, overall, Franz, once he's raised, is kind of just like a miniaturized version of Seth. So, very good unit. Next, we have Giliam, who I think Giliam is probably he's either E or D. I think Giliam I think Gilliam is probably it's tough. I'm gonna say he's in D tier. Gilliam is slow, he's sturdy, and he has unfortunately low bases for an armor knight at his join time. He can catch up, and he can certainly have his uses, but generally armor knights are relegated to being relatively low on tier lists simply due to lack of movement. Gilliam can have a number of uses in Sacred Stones. He can be really potent once he gets going, but his issue is just getting going in the first place. Um, he he does have two good promotion options. In either he can become the general, which gets the skill Great Shield, which can potentially negate damage when he's attacked, or he can go the route of Great Knight, which gets an extra point of movement, Makes rescue drops just that little bit easier. And uh, yeah, just a few, he gets a decent variety of options there. Uh, Overall, though, because of his relatively low bases, the difficulty in him generally keeping up with the rest of your army, he's kind of got to sit in D tier. I do like him though. I think he has more use than a lot of people give him credit for. He's just he's a bit slow in order to get there. But yeah, use him out. You might be surprised. Who's next? I think next is two of the best units in the game here. We've got Moulder. Moulder is probably in A tier right behind France. So he is your first healer in the game. He's a very, very good healer, but he's also got something going for him that your other early game healer, Natasha, does not. Moulder has a shockingly high constitution score. And that constitution score allows him to, upon promotion, wield some of the heavier tomes without question. On top of that, one of his promotion options is Bishop, which gets access to the Slayer skill, which is a very powerful skill that allows you to deal effective damage against monster creatures, of which the game is populated by so many in the late game. And quite a few in the early game on some maps as well. There are entire maps full of monsters. So between those two things, Moulder is very potent. He brings a lot to the table, and with his high con, he doesn't really get slowed down as much when he's using those heavier tomes, which allows him to, on top of that, he is fairly beefy, has relatively high HP, so he gets some bulk out of it. He's just a really solid unit all around. And yeah, makes perfect sense for him to be an A tier. Vanessa is quite possibly your only other S tier unit in the game. She is your early flyer. She has pretty okay bases for her join time and a lot of time to level them up. She can do rescue drop strats where she can fly over mountains and save other units and also drop them closer to the boss. She can block off spawns where enemies might come from, so you have less to deal with when the time comes. She's very, very capable. Takes a little bit of doing to get there, unlike Seth, but her utility is unmatched in what she provides for your army, so I think she simply has to go into S tier. Her two promotion options being the Pegasus Knight or the Draco Knight only further this, because she can either gain the Pierce skill, which takes her generally mediocre strength out of the equation by adding, I believe, it halves the defense of enemies when it's used, so it just deals a lot more damage. But it might also be 1.5 times strength. I think it's halves the enemy defense though. Or Pegasus Knight, where she can potentially perform what is called a triangle attack with two other units in the game, those being Tana and Sirene. That will happen very late if you do go that route, so keep that in mind. I don't recommend going into Pegasus Knight, or yeah, I don't recommend going into Falcon Knight. Sorry, I don't recommend going into Falcon Knight unless you really want to see the triangle attack. But it's generally not worth it at the time of the game which you get it. Moving along, next we have Garcia. Garcia is Garcia's interesting. I think that Garcia, I'm debating low B. I think he is low B. Garcia has really solid bases, but his speed growth leaves a lot to be desired. So he can have trouble doubling later on. However, his bases are so good that I think, and enemies in this game are also reasonably slow enough that I think it's totally fair to put him in B tier. On top of that, he can also go into Hero in order to fix his speed issues. because he will gain a lot upon promotion. He's a great candidate for the late game weapon Garm, which can also boost his speed even further. So Garcia is just a super, super consistent unit. His son Ross also probably goes in B tier. They're fairly interchangeable in one way. So Ross is what we call a trainee unit. He starts as a level 1 unit of a class with really low basis. It's effectively a fighter with none of the stats going for them off the rip. But because of this, he gets an extra 9 levels effectively, because he automatically will change into either a fighter or a pirate at level 10. But um, he does a very good job of getting extra stats thanks to those levels. That's how people see it. However, because his bases are so low, kind of a toss up on where he'll end up. And he can get speed screwed just like his father. So between the two, it's kind of personal choice. A lot of people prefer to use Ross because he can go into pirate. Pirates can do some funny things like water walking, which can occasionally be a useful tool for traversing the map. And thanks to Ross's potentially very high statistical gains, he can just walk his way down to wherever you want him to go and then wreck shop. Garcia can't do that quite as much, but he is a much more consistent pick. You'll know his stats out the gate, you'll know what to expect, and he will stay very even keel for you most of the run. Next up is Naomi. Now, Naomi, this is a controversial take, but she, I think, is C tier. Naomi is significantly better than a lot of people give her credit for. She is your early game archer, and she has some abysmal bases. But she also joins within the first 3, 4, if you count the prologue chapters of the game. She has a lot of time to level up. She gets access to the only Orion's Bolt in the game. It's all hers. You're probably not playing for it generally, or you might even consider selling it if you don't want to use Naomi. But I think that because she has all this time in the world, you can very easily early promote her or train her in the arena, and what you'll end up with is she'll promote, she will get access to a one range weapon and swords, and she gets a pony. And the horse does so much for Naomi. She becomes a very good dodge tank with by going into ranger. Never put her into sniper, by the way. That will end up with a terrible Naomi. But if she goes into ranger, she'll end up with pretty good avoid. Can actually be quite a bit of a dodge tank. She has surprisingly high resistance, which makes her very effective at dealing with magic enemies, though to be fair, most of your army will probably be pretty good at that, but it does help in the late game against certain enemies like Reeve, or maybe on Phantom Ship, where you have to deal with a lot of those moguls. But she gets very fast supports with a number of other units. I think 5 supports in total. She she basically gets personal access to Nidhogg if you're not using Innis, which is I mean, it's one of the holy weapons of the game and is very good at its job for that reason. But she can also, as I said before, use swords. And because of how easy it is to level her in the arena, and how easy it is to get EXP early game through killing monsters, and and the fact that on promotion she'll get a pony and can rescue drop, I do think that Naomi should be put probably at the bottom of C tier. I think she's a perfectly fine unit. I think she gets entirely too much crap, and she has this is a fun fact people don't realize a lot of the time. She has a strength growth that is equal to who is often considered one of the best units in the game, Garrick. but we'll get to him later. Next up is Colm. Colm is one of our channel mascots here, along with Naomi, but he opened the chest. He is a perfectly average thief. He does his job perfectly well. If you want him to be a combat unit, you will eventually promote him into an assassin. And if you want him to keep being your thief of choice, you will promote him into a rogue. Now, I always recommend going into rogue on the chapter where you recruit Rennick once you've recruited Rennick. Rennick is your other thief. He starts as a rogue, so he's effectively a pre-promoted thief. But once you are at the point where you get Rennick, is the exact point where if you've used all of Colm's lockpick, you've effectively used the exact amount of uses necessary for the lockpick to run out, I believe. I'm pretty sure it's the exact amount. So Colm transitions perfectly into Rennick, and then you can use him as a combat unit if you want. Do I recommend that? Generally, no. And the reason for that is because you will get another swordsman not significantly later, like 2 chapters later, who is really, really good and stays consistent for most of the game through his bases. Next up, we have Arter. Arter is probably like high B tier. He is your monk. He gets access to light magic as a result, which deals effective damage against, you guessed it, dark magic, but also against most monsters. Any monster who wields magic uses dark magic. And once he promotes, he too can get Slayer. He can also go into Sage if you want him to, though I don't think most people do that. As a bishop, he is just significantly better. One of the most broken classes in the game, and despite him not being on the same level as Moulder, having less constitution, he still does quite fine in the class, and he has high enough speed to somewhat make up for that issue. So I think that he is, despite being not as bulky as Moulder, can't take quite as many hits, I think he still comfortably goes into high B tier thanks to what he can provide for you later in the game. Lute is your game's mage, and she probably goes like middle of B tier. I think she's better than Garcia. Lute has some interesting choices. She can either go into Sage, where she gets access to new types of magic and staves, or she can go into Mage Knight, who I don't remember whether or not Mage Knights get light magic. I don't think so, but I could be wrong there. But I know that Mage Knights get a pony and they get staves. So Lute can also, upon promotion, do some rescue drop shenanigans. She hits fairly hard at base. As you would expect of a mage, though, she is your glass cannon unit. She is quite good at hitting things. Will not always double, though she usually has enough speed to double. Won't always. But she hits hard, and she takes a lot in return for that. So as long as you have a way to carefully use Lute, she will end up quite good. And then upon promotion, you can either have her try to take over the magic weapon triangle, or you can send her into Mage Knight and she can do rescue drop shenanigans. Rescue drop shenanigans are a lot of fun. Who is next after that? I think we have Natasha. Natasha is... I think Natasha is probably in D tier. Possibly even lower than Giliam. Giliam provides something for you early game, and Natasha really doesn't. Natasha's biggest issue is by the point in the game in which you get her, which is still relatively early, you already have Moulder, who is a significantly better healer overall, comes with a higher staff rank, uh, much more bulk, and then Natasha joins, and she is just kind of okay. Like, she's fine, she's fieldable, but there's no real reason to, because you already have your healer who can turn into a bishop. Now, upon promotion, can she be really good? She also has low constitution, which slows her down significantly despite her high speed. So Natasha, ultimately, she just doesn't do anything that nobody else can already do. Her one thing that she can do is, if you do use her, she can go into, what are they called? It's a troubadour promotion. I can't remember off the top of my head, but she can effectively go into she can get a pony and go into the light magic version of the Mage Knight class line. And that can be useful for her, but then Lara Shell comes much later and can do the same thing. Uh, so Natasha just kind of is in limbo. She's in a really weird spot where there's no unit that doesn't do what she does in some capacity and generally does it better than she does. So unfortunately, because you are eventually going to run out of promotion items, I think she's got to be in D tier there. Now, on the other hand, Joshua is a character I've come around on over the years. I think Joshua firmly plants himself in A tier. His bases are really, really good. So good, in fact, that despite the fact that he will always be using one of the worst weapon types in the game in swords, he doesn't care. He has enough HP to generally take a hit or two if need be. He has relatively high avoid. His con is usually just enough to wield whatever weapon he wants, and his strength, skill, and speed, they are all really, really high for his join time, to the point where his growths don't matter as much. They are good growths, well, they're not great good growths, is what I meant to say, but they're fine. They're passable growths for, so don't get me wrong, he's not like going to stagnate, but he is really, really solid. And then upon promotion, you'll probably send him into Swordmaster, and he will start critting things more than he's already doing at base. So Joshua, pretty solid unit. Definitely recommend giving him a go. Next, I believe we are at, yeah, we're at Ephraim. Ephraim is probably top of A tier. I would even consider possibly throwing him into S tier. My only issue with doing that is if you go into Erica's route, he's not around for a long chunk of the game, but he still comes back quite good. I think Ephraim does belong as our third character here in S tier. Ephraim is an obscenely strong unit. His growths are really, really good, so he will continue to make crazy gains. He gets a personal weapon in the Regent Leaf, which deals effective damage against armors and horses, and it is he fights a lot of those. Um, he has all the time in the world to gain a plethora of stats, and in my experience, it is entirely possible for Ephraim to be completely maxed out on his pre-promote level during the root split. Like he can do this well before he would come back around to getting his personal promotion item. Usually, I mean, I've even had him promoted before he fights the Emperor of Grotto. So I think that there is no way that with his with his gains and his ability to just wreck shop so much that he can hit max level that early, that I can't throw him into S tier. If you go down Erica's route, he's a little bit worse, but he still comes with a high enough level when he returns that I think it's totally fine. He will come back with a decently high level with pretty decent bases all around, and once you get him again, you'll just give him a few levels and he'll be right back where you want him to be. So Ephraim, I think he belongs right there. Now we have Kyle and Ford, who are both probably right about. Come on, there we go. They're probably both right about here, if it'll stop doubling. Kyle and Ford are completely interchangeable units. Kyle is a little bit better than Ford, but they are both your Cavaliers. Cavaliers are a high movement class. They are what Franz does, but slightly later than Franz. Franz, as we established earlier, is a miniature version of the best unit in the game. Ergo, two other units that are very much so like Franz, except with generally, I would say, slightly better growths, but a worse join time. They are also capable of being miniature Seths. So I think only fair. They belong in B tier there. Not a lot else to say. Orson also joins at this time, and you may notice here that Orson has a tier all to himself, and that is because, without spoiling anything, Orson falls off really hard. He is very good when you first get him, and he is never good beyond that point. So unfortunately, Orson goes right there into the Orson tier. Who joins you next? It kind of depends on route, I think. So we will discuss. I think we will start by discussing Cormag. No, actually, Amelia comes before that. We'll discuss Amelia. Amelia and Tana. Amelia is actually bad, but I think the one thing that maybe keeps her out of E tier is that she can theoretically on I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to keep her out. But theoretically on Ephraim's route, maybe on Erica's route, but theoretically she can trap a couple of archers, slowly whittle them down to death, and then be able to promote out of her trainee class on the same chapter in which you recruit her. In which case, she becomes bad, still very underleveled, but she can go into Cavalier and can do some rescue drop stuff. Is it enough to make up for everything else? Not really. She doesn't have any sort of early game viability because she doesn't join in the early game, so I think she has to fall there. Tana, on the other hand, Tana is probably right around here. She's a flyer. She is your second flyer that you get. She has better growths, I believe, than Vanessa, with worse availability, but she is still generally a fairly solid, fairly competent unit. She will perform effectively. She comes under leveled, but you give her a few levels, she'll catch right up. And then the utility that she provides, same as Vanessa, will just be unparalleled. Now, unfortunately for her, on Ephraim route, Cormag comes a chapter later. You do have to use Tana to recruit Cormag, but Cormag is an incredible unit. I would say he goes right there. He's a very powerful unit. He joins when spoken to by Tana or Dwessel on Dussel. Dussel? I always go with Dussel. But he joins when spoken to by Tana or Dussel on Ephraim's route, or when spoken to by Erica on her route. On Erica's route, I believe he joins a chapter, maybe 2 chapters later. And he's still really, really solid. On Erica's route, he joins at the appropriate time. On Erica's route, he joins like a chapter or 2 later. On Ephraim's route, he joins at, like very early into the route. He can promote into either the Wyvern Knight or the Wyvern Lord. You're probably going to go Wyvern Knight. Wyvern Knight gives him a huge speed boost. He can promote either like pretty much right away. It doesn't take a lot to get him there. And while you can wait, there's not a lot of reason to, because he is solid enough to begin with that extra speed boost that he will get from going into Wyvern Knight will really help him out, and he'll just carry himself through the rest of the game from there. Very solid unit. Does plenty for your army. Locked to the best weapon type in the game, arguably. Flyer, high constitution, just great all around. Next, we'll talk about Dussel, who I also think is an A tier. I would put him right behind Cormag. Dussel is a pre-promote that has very worthy stats for the time he joins. He eventually, his only real lacking thing is his speed, but he's so tanky that it barely matters. The only thing potentially going against Dussel is just if he misses out on his speed growths. But again, absolute beast of a unit. On a mount, can do rescue drops, has A rank in every weapon when he joins, meaning you can train him to use 3 different holy weapons by the end game. Not all of them at once, but you can train him to use any of the 3. He is, in most playthroughs, I would argue, going to serve as a player's second, slightly worse Seth. He doesn't have Seth's movement. He has 6 movement compared to Seth's 8. But other than that, their stats are fairly comparable, save for that Seth is faster. So I think Dussel goes right there and earns his spot. Let's talk about who next. Let's go with Lara Shell. Lara Shell really sucks. Man, Lara Shell really sucks. It's such a shame. She joins fairly late. Unfortunately, really late, as a low-level troubadour, meaning it'll take some time for her to get to a point where you can promote her. But she also joins as a troubadour, which is one of, it's a very good class in the GBA Fire Emblem games. Pretty good in a lot of other Fire Emblem games as well, by virtue of having a mount. She gets higher movement, she can rescue drop, she can heal people. She's just so late on her join time, unfortunately, that a lot of it doesn't matter. Most of your army will already be squared away by then. So unfortunately, I don't think she's even better than Natasha by the time she joins. Dazla, on the other hand, Dazla is a pretty solid, uh, pretty solid berserker. He joins at the same time Lara does. Hits fairly hard, but is also kind of in the same vein as Arter or Loot. He's a glass cannon. He dishes it out. He has enough HP that he can kind of take it, unlike them, but he has very low defenses, and so if he does get hit, you need to be prepared to heal him next turn, and he will get hit a lot. So serviceable unit, nothing wrong with him. Not the greatest. Next up, let's say I think it's Garrick is next. Garrick is probably right here, top of B tier. He would be higher if he joined just a little bit sooner. He can promote into either the hero or the ranger. The hero gives him access to hand axes, which is quite possibly the single best weapon in the game. Very versatile 1 to 2 range. He makes great use of them. Or he can go into Ranger. Ranger gives him a mount and lets him do rescue drop strats. He can do either of these things from the moment he joins, because he joins at level 10 with the promotion item he needs to promote. However, you can also choose to wait. And if you choose to wait, Garrick's growths are solid enough that he can kind of, he can kind of gain some stats in the meanwhile and potentially come back as an absolute menace. He doesn't need to. He's very solid being promoted right away, but he can. Who else? Joining at the same time as Garrick, we have Teus. Teus is your dancer. She's gonna go right below Seth. Dancers can refresh your units. Any unit you have that they can reach can get a second move, do anything they want with that in any given turn. This is an extremely powerful thing. Every dancer in pretty much every Fire Emblem game, barring perhaps Fire Emblem 4, is probably going to end up in S tier. Teus is great. Unfortunately, Sacred Stones is a fairly easy game, and Seth is so busted that he doesn't even need her. So I feel like she has to go right below Seth. Next up, we're going to say Ewan. Ewan is, he's not great. I don't think he's worse than Amelia. I don't think he's better than Lara. Ewan is a really bad trainee unit who comes extremely late in the game. And if you're using the Tower of Volney, disregard everything I say, because he will be just fine. But as a trainee unit, he deals absolutely pitiful damage. You'll need to do this same strat that you would do with Amelia to train him up, where you essentially trap an archer and just let him whittle away at them. Once he promotes, he can either become a mage or a dark mage. You're going to go dark mage every time, because his one little bit of utility that he can do that only one other unit in the game can do is that you can eventually promote him from a dark mage into a summoner, and summoners are a very handy tool that you can have, because they can summon a single other phantom unit, which has 1 HP, but it serves as a way to it's effectively a disposable unit that you can use at will. It can bait enemies into ranges for your other characters. It can be used to finish off weakened enemies at a distance. They have no movement penalties. Phantoms are just a very handy tool that summoners get, and I think that with that, can be useful, but it is a very, very much slog to get to that point. Uh, Marissa. Marissa, I think, is probably the worst unit in the game. Marissa is a Myrmidon, same class as Joshua, who joins with worse bases than Joshua, worse constitution than Joshua, lower level than Joshua, significantly later in the game than Joshua, and her growths are just whatever. Marissa's bad. You're probably not going to use her, and I think that's where she belongs. I think she actually provides less than Amelia, because at least Amelia can promote into a Cavalier and engage in rescue drop strats, and that's the only reason that Amelia and Lara Shell are ahead of her, and Ewan, of course, can go into Summoner. Marissa provides nothing other than the woe dash she comes with. Next, we'll do Innis. Innis is... He's either low C or top of D. I think he's top of D. Maps start to get a lot bigger towards the end game, and Innis, he can't keep up as much. He is fine at what he does, but unfortunately what he does is be a sniper. Snipers cannot attack on enemy phase most of the time because they lack 1 to 2 range. They only have 2 range. I believe, and I could be remembering this incorrectly, but I believe that the last ballista that you get is on his joining chapter, so he loses out on any future utility for that. He's in a bit of a rough spot. His actual bases are pretty solid, so he can theoretically contribute an attack against some enemies from behind the front lines and do a bit of damage. You can chip to help raise up some of your other units, but he's probably not going to do much more than that. So I think, unfortunately, Innis has to settle in there. Now, Noel is interesting, because Noel is a bad unit, but he's a bad unit that can do something really good, which is summoning. Unfortunately, Noel has 0 luck, so Noel will eventually, inevitably, be the victim of a stray critical hit, which will cause you to reset a level. Sucks. It sucks when that happens. And what he provides fairly late into the game. On top of that, he has not the highest con in the world for, or speed for that matter, given how high of a weight the dark tomes tend to be. Noel he's exactly serviceable, is what I would say. He's like the exact line between not worth it and usable. Myr doesn't join until later. We'll talk about Myr in a second. First, let's talk about Rennick. Rennick, he opened a chest. Rennick is capable of doing the exact same thing Colm does, just does it a little bit later than Colm. But by the time you get Rennick, Colm can theoretically promote into a combat unit if you want him to. So they're both fine. He's a perfectly serviceable replacement for Colm, and they're pretty interchangeable. Use whichever you'd prefer for your thieving. Sally? I'm going with Sally, I think is correct. This character is like a unit from FE7 in that he is a pre-promote with staves, very good bases, horrible growths. But he does get to he does have really high magic. So he starts strong, doesn't really go anywhere beyond that. I think he's probably around here in that he can pretty much do what Loot does with no investment, but he's stuck in the Sage class line. He can't get access to Mage Knight. And he does get access to staves, but it's not at a very high level. So I think he is a pretty good replacement unit, but definitely not the best. Finally, we have Myrrh. Myrrh is probably right here. Myrrh is one of the strongest in the game when she gets going. It takes her not very long to get going. She can easily do so in her joining chapter. And once she does so, she will be competent for the rest of the game. The only issue, Myrrh is, Myrrh's just a really late joiner. She's just a really late joiner. And as a result, this is about where she ends up. Now, if she joined a little bit earlier, or if her Dragonstone had more uses, she would probably be in S tier. But as it stands, still a very, very good unit for when you get her all the way through the rest of the game. And I think that says plenty. And then finally we have Sirene. Sirene is probably the top of D tier. Sirene has Seth's bases when she is the last character to join the game. Seth is a very, very good unit, and he has all the time in the world to grow. Sirene does not have any of that time to grow, but she's a Falcon Knight, so she comes able to do flyer, rescue, bullshit. In that regard, Sirene can occasionally be useful. However, she joins so late that there is very little left for her to do. And as a result, I think she ends up there. You can use Sirene, but I think this is about on average where she'll end up. Anyway, that's my tier list. Hopefully, if you're relatively new to the game, this gives you some idea of about where things will land. And if you're a regular connoisseur of Fire Emblem, I'm sure you have a few things to say about my placements, but I do stand by them. So with that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.